Hello everyone, in this video I'll be going over how to use the Xentity Procedural World Generation tool. It's pretty straightforward, so once you have the asset imported, you'll have this folder. If you go in here, go inside prefab and drag this world master object into the scene, and you'll see this inspector. It does require a world setting to start using, so go ahead and create one by right clicking, create and world generation world settings, or I have one created already, which is the demo settings, and use that. So once you select it, you'll see this option. So if you have this world editor enabled, you'll see all this pop up. So inside the world settings, you'll have all this other settings. So the global settings, let's go over all of these. So you can assign a seed or just use a random seed. And the world size in chunks. So this is essentially how many chunks there are per axis of the world. So the X and Z axis. 35 means there's 35 in the X and 35 in the Z. So the world has a size of 35 chunks by 35 chunks. And the chunk size is the size of each chunk that is in the world. So if you look at the unit size of the world, you just multiply this by this, 35 times 16. And you have the chunk material, so a vertex color shader already comes with the asset. And if you want to use the gradient, you need a vertex color shader for the chunk material. And you can choose to generate a collider. So if you are in URP or HDRP, you might have to go in the materials folder here, go into vertex color, select it, and edit. And here you'll have a rendering tab. Go into rendering and generate URP or HDRP, or upgrade to URP or HDRP materials. So let's go back to the world master. And after the global settings, you have the height settings. So how the height is calculated. You have a curve that you can set. So if you have an option selected here that uses the curve, it will be using this curve here. And you have a height multiplier, so this is essentially the maximum height of the terrain. And of course the height calculation method, there's default, which just uses the raw height map, or squared, which squares the height map, or cubed, which cubes the height map, or curve, which uses the curve only, or there's the combination of the other two. And there's this uniform radial fallout variable. So this is used to create a raised island in the center that falls off radially. Okay, and you have the terrain noise settings. So this is essentially the noise map that the world uses to generate all the height data. So the scale is the scale of the noise map, of course, and the octave, linearity, and persistence have to do with layering the noise with different amplitudes and frequency. So the octave is essentially how many times it is being layered, and linearity and persistence has to do with how the amplitude and the frequency changes. You can look it up on the internet. There's a lot of information about how these work. And you have the spawn settings. So this wasn't the plan to implement on this asset, but I did add a very basic version of it, and this essentially spawns object. You can see a little note. This is kind of primitive because it is, and you can add objects to spawn here. We'll do that in a bit. Hold on. So you can create the world in the editor using this. You can see the warning. Creating a world will delete any existing world linked to this world master. Or you can generate on start and then start the game, and the world will be generated on start. So it might take a little bit to generate a world if it's really large, because it is using a separate thread to generate it. So you have to wait for all the data to be unloaded into the main thread of Unity. So let's just hit generate with the default settings, or create. And once you have this green message saying world generation complete, if you hover over this inspector again, you'll have these two buttons pop up. You can see the note saying deactivating or activating chunks will only work properly if chunk visibility updater is disabled. So you can check that by going to this other script, chunk visibility update handler, and make sure this is disabled here. And we can't see any of the chunks because by default they are all deactivated. So you can just hit activate all chunks, and if we zoom out, you can see the world is generated. And it uses the vertex gradient to add the colors, right? So essentially the whole world is visible to us now, but if you have a really big world, you want the world to be only loaded around the player. So if we go in this chunk visibility update handler and enable it, you'll see I'm getting an unassigned reference exception because there's no viewer assigned to the updater. So let's just create a cube, call it viewer. I'll just reset the position and go into world master, drag this to the viewer, and you can see it voids the chunks around the viewer, but all the other chunks are visible because they were active by default, all of them. If you now just hit deactivate all chunks, it will only keep the chunks that are around the player active. So this is really helpful for really large worlds, so you only have this much world loaded at once. So let's see what else. You can select the update method that you want this updater to use. You can use update, fixed update, or late update. I found late update works well if you have a lot of other things going on in update and fixed update. And visible chunks per axis. So this must always be a multiple of 16 that is greater than or equal to 16. So this is because of the compute shader thread compatibility. This is how the compute shader is set up. So unless you know what you're doing with compute shaders, you don't want to change this too much. Well, you can change it here. This auto rounds to a multiple of 16. So you can go 32, 48. I'll just keep it at 16. And this update method only works at runtime or in play mode. So in the editor, this is being updated, the visibility, but it is happening in just update. So even if you pick fixed update, it will only happen at update. But at runtime, this will be only happening in the chosen update method. Okay, and let's delete this world and create a new world with different settings. So I'll just go into spawn settings. Let's spawn some objects. So just hit add, and if I just go in here, you'll see the data for the spawning. So the prefab of the object that's going to be instantiated, I have one created already. It's this little capsule with the cube going through it. So I'll just select that, and you set the min spawn height. So let me just look at the height multiplier. So the maximum height is going to be 50. So let's set the min spawn to something like 20 and max to something like 35. So we have to set the spawn chance of this object particularly. So we can set it to something like 0.5. And let's randomize the Y rotation. And global spawn chance is, so the global spawn chance applies to all of them. So if you have it to 0, no objects will spawn basically, even if you have multiple objects here. Let's just set it to 1, so there's a high chance of spawning this object. And if we just hit create now, this will, oh, this created a lot of that, a lot of the objects here. You can see all of these objects created, but they also have random rotation. Let's see if we can find like patches with no objects over here. So these vertices here are above the threshold max value, the max height. And let's just go in here, go to spawn settings, just decrease this a little bit, set it to 0.01, and create world. Yeah, okay, this is better. Yeah, so you can imagine these can be trees being spawned. And let's just, we can't, if we activate all chunks now, this will cause this little bug. So all we have to do is just disable the chunk visibility updater and activate all chunks. And now everything is enabled and you can see everything that is spawned. So I will improve this spawning feature in the future, and also there is a known issue with the tool. So you can see for really curvy terrains, you can see these seams along the edges of the chunks. This is due to the normals not aligning properly with the neighboring chunks. So I do have plans to fix that, but not at the moment. I don't have a lot of time. But yeah. And when you create a world, you can see this world object created with the world seed as the suffix of the world. Let's just delete this world and show you that it also works on play mode. So if I just said generate on start, and so on play mode you probably want the visibility updater to be enabled. So do that. Start the game and just go to scene view, and you can see around the viewer the world is loaded in. Let's okay, no, there's no world created right now. Okay, so few things. The world data is generated on a separate thread that's not Unity's main thread. However, the chunk visibility updates using a compute shader, and the compute shader can be found in here. So you don't want to really mess around with this shader too much. It can cause problems. So I'll just create a large world to show you that it does work with extremely large worlds. So select something like 300. So you can imagine the world size would be 300 times 16, which is pretty big. Not sure what that is, but pretty big. And because the world is really big, it will take a little bit of time to generate the whole world. So let's hit create world. You can see the generating world. So now everything is happening on a different thread. And when the data is unloaded into the main thread, it sometimes, yeah, it can cause these exceptions with the length. But essentially, they will be fixed when you just go around like this. So yeah. If I do find other bugs, I will try to fix them. But at the moment, I haven't found any new bugs. So that's that. And you can go into the folder, readme here, and there's the instructions for how to set it up. Instructions and some known issues, dev notes, and if you want to contact me, you can DM me on Discord here. Alright, that's it. Yeah, if you need any help, just DM me, and I'll try my best to help. Thank you very much.